What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my Week 7 running back start sits, so breaking down every single Week 7 matchup, talking about every fantasy relevant running back, and then listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. The starts are going to be your running back 2s and your running back 1s. Don't know I listed them in that order, but just the players you feel confident throwing into your starting lineup in the running back slot. The fringe options, these are going to be like your RB3s, your flex options. You may not love it, playing these guys, but here in Week 7 with 6 teams on bye, you may want to plug and play some of those fringe options. And then sits, pretty self-explanatory. Those are guys you would prefer to keep on your bench. I'll also have my wide receiver start sits out today also, and then I'll have the quarterbacks and tight ends out tomorrow. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. But let's dive right into the Thursday night game where we have the Jaguars taking on the Saints, and really nothing crazy here. You fire up Travis Etienne as a very strong start, and you fire up Alvin Kamara as a very strong start. Both of these guys are workhorses in their current offenses. For the Jaguars, you're hoping that Trevor Lawrence is able to give it a go, but even if he isn't, you still fire up Travis Etienne as a running back 1. Now shifting over to the Sunday slate, we have the Lions taking on the Ravens, and kind of an interesting spot here with this Lions running back room. We've had Jahmyr Gibbs miss the last 2 weeks, and then we had David Montgomery leave the Week 6 game with a rib injury. According to Dan Campbell, it seems like he may be missing some time here, missing a few weeks. So Jahmyr Gibbs, I believe Dan Campbell said he was day-to-day. He seemed pretty optimistic that he'd be able to give it a go on Sunday. So if Jahmyr Gibbs is going and David Montgomery is out, I think you fire up Jahmyr Gibbs as a start. This is a big opportunity for Jahmyr Gibbs to kind of impress this coaching staff before David Montgomery does return, potentially start to eat into that Montgomery workload in the long term. Now, if Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery don't play, Craig Reynolds would be the guy you probably want to fire up. I'd probably only list him as a fringe option because I do think it could turn into a gross committee, but hopefully if David Montgomery is out, Jahmyr Gibbs is able to give it a go, and you fire him up as a start. On the other side with the Ravens, Gus Edwards was able to maintain the running back 1 role here. He had a 62% snap share, 51% raw participation, and then he took 16 of the 24 running back carries. He also took all 5 of the goal line snaps, which is interesting. We've seen in previous weeks Justice Hill is kind of filtered in there on the goal line, so good for Gus Edwards that he's locking down that goal line role. I still think he's only a fringe option because this usage could flip up. The Lions have also just been really tough against opposing running backs, so Gus Edwards is going to be a fringe play for me, and then Justice Hill as a sit. Now moving over to the Raiders-Bears matchup here. For the Raiders, you just continue to fire up Josh Jacobs as a really strong running back 1 start. Hopefully Jimmy G is able to play, but even without Jimmy G, Josh Jacobs still going to be a start. Then for the Bears, we have Roschon Johnson, and last week when we knew Khalil Herbert was on IR, we thought Roschon Johnson was going to play. I had Roschon listed as a start. This week I have him as a fringe option, and it just comes down to the quarterback position. It seems like Justin Fields is going to miss some time, dislocated his thumb, and this Bears offense has the potential to be really, really bad without Justin Fields. They weren't great with him, I guess barring the last, Week 4 and Week 5. Without Justin Fields, this offense really could just completely fall apart. So Roschon Johnson may be leading this backfield, but I don't know how efficient he's going to be. So that's why he's more of a fringe option, probably like a higher end running back 3. If Roschon's not playing, you just want to fade that running back room. Deonta Foreman and De'Aaron Evans, I believe, were in a very solid split. So you would want to fade those guys if Roschon is not able to play. In the next game, we have the Browns taking on the Colts. And for the Browns here, I have Jerome Ford as a fringe option, Kareem Hunt as a sit, but they are pretty close at this point. Kareem Hunt did have the better fantasy day. He got into the end zone, but Jerome Ford had the better overall role. He played more snaps. They both ran 13 routes. Jerome Ford saw 19 opportunities to Kareem Hunt's 15, so pretty close, but Jerome Ford was still in the lead. So I do think that usage could potentially flip at some point. Maybe Kareem Hunt takes over. Maybe Jerome Ford improves on his role. I don't think it's set in stone, but right now I would be favoring Jerome Ford. The Colts have also been in the top 10 for points allowed to fantasy running backs, so it is a decent matchup, which is why I have Jerome Ford as a fringe option. But in my overall weekly rankings coming out on Thursday, those guys will probably be pretty close together. And then for the Colts here, it's just another tough week trying to, kind of break down this running back room. We saw in week 5 when Jonathan Taylor made his return, Zach Moss just completely dominated the usage, dominated all the opportunities. Then in week 6, Coming into the week, I was thinking, all right, JT's probably going to take this slight lead. I don't think he's going to be way out touched like he was by Zach Moss in week 5. They basically go into a 50-50 split. So we saw Moss run 6 more routes and he played 6 more snaps, but both guys saw 15 opportunities. So, very even workload there. Neither guy was super effective on the ground. I do think it was good to see the running back position get super involved in the passing game. That's good to see for JT's long-term upside this season. Zach Moss was the guy who got into the end zone, so his fantasy day was better. But looking at this start-sit, I have JT as a start, Zach Moss as a sit. You may be wondering why Moss isn't a fringe option, or why aren't they both fringe options. I just think we saw JT really improve on his role from week 5 to week 6. I think he takes another jump in his usage here in week 7, and this is a really tough matchup here against this Browns defense. So if I think JT is going to lead this backfield, I don't want to be starting the second option, even if it's somewhat of a committee against this Browns defense that has been really tough. I wouldn't want to be starting Zach Moss if I think JT is going to get most of the work. Now, if you think Zach Moss is going to lead the backfield, then by all means, go ahead, play him. But the way that I'm looking at this backfield, I think JT is going to lead. I think he's going to improve on his opportunities, which means that Zach Moss is going to be a sit for me. In the next game, we have a divisional matchup between the Bills and the Patriots. And for the Bills, not looking great for James Cook here. He's had a disappointing last 2 weeks. In week 5, he only saw 9 opportunities, and then in week 6, he had a solid workload on the ground, but was not targeted a single time, which I think is where a lot of people, including myself, kind of thought his upside would come in, as a receiving back. Cook and Murray split the backfield 50-50 in terms of snaps, so they each took 30 snaps, and I think 61 total plays from the Bills. I'm not ready to go full panic mode on James Cook. Remember, weeks 1 through 4, he was averaging 14.5 PPR points per game. He's still the younger option in this backfield. He's the guy they're going to have in the future, so I don't think it's totally gone that he could lead this backfield the rest of season. But in the short term, if he's not going to be super involved as a pass catcher, and the Bills are taking him off the field when they're getting close to the goal line, a lot of his upside is kind of zapped at this point. So I have both of these guys as a fringe options. They're going to be on a top offense, but pretty much in a 50-50 split. Also not a great look with Leonard Fournette potentially signing there. Not that Fournette's going to come in and have a huge workload, but you kind of thought, maybe with Damian Harris going down, the touches would be more concentrated. It seems like they still want to have some sort of 3 running back thing going on here. So for this week, they're a fringe option. I still prefer James Cook over Latavius Murray long term, but not great, coming off of the last 2 weeks. On the other side for the Patriots, this was great usage out of Ramondre Stevenson. This backfield was pretty much trending towards a 50-50 split. That's what we saw in week 5. Ramondre was able to improve his snap share up to 65% and then had a 62% route participation. Also saw 17 opportunities compared to Ezekiel Elliott's 8. So all good signs there from Ramondre. Also good to see him pretty involved as a pass catcher. 6 targets, 5 receptions. You love to see that out of Ramondre. So he's going to be back to a start as more of a mid to back end RB2. And then Zeke is going to be a sit for me. Then shifting over to the Commanders-Giants matchup. For the Commanders, this was not a great Brian Robinson game in a game script where you thought he'd have a lot of usage. He only had a 53% snap share, took 10 of the 17 running back carries. I still think he's a weekly back-end RB2, but this definitely hasn't been a great stretch out of Brian Robinson here. For the Giants, they finally get Saquon Barkley back. If Saquon Barkley's active, you're firing him up as a very, very confident start. The next game, we have the Falcons taking on the Buccaneers. This Falcons rushing attack has not looked great over the last few weeks. We've had some inefficient games out of both Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Not great, but for Bijan Robinson, even if they're trailing or inefficient on the ground, he's still going to have a solid workload as a pass catcher, which is why you continue to fire him up as a running back 1, going to be sitting Tyler Algier. And then for the Bucs, Rachaad White went out and absolutely dominated the snaps coming out of the bye, but he did not dominate the opportunities. He only had 11 to Keyshawn Vaughn's 7, so even though he was out there, pretty much every play, when Keyshawn Vaughn was on the field, he was getting the ball, and typically that was on early downs. This Bucs rushing attack has just not been super efficient. Rachaad White's averaging 3.3 yards per carry, and then this also is a tough matchup here against the Falcons. They've allowed the 3rd fewest points per game, fantasy-wise, to the running back position. I think the one positive for Rachaad White is that he had a 76% route participation, which is great at the running back position. but he's probably more of like a mid to low end fringe play this week. He's going to be some sort of running back 3. He just hasn't been great even in solid opportunities, plus the tough matchup. I wouldn't be super excited about Rachaad White at this point. Then we're going to have the Steelers taking on the Rams. And I think this is the first week I've officially relegated Najee Harris to the sit section. Jaylen Warren is a fringe play. Jaylen Warren has actually outscored Najee Harris in all 5 of their games in terms of fantasy PPR scoring. Even with Najee getting 12.6 carries a game, it's just not going to matter if he's getting those touches on the ground when they're super inefficient and he's lacking like any touchdown upside in this offense. And he's also not super involved as a pass catcher, averaging less than 2 targets a game. That's honestly probably the biggest hit from like his rookie season to now, the lack of receiving usage. Looking at Jaylen Warren, you definitely can't be super excited about playing him either. He's also going to be inefficient on the ground. He hasn't scored a single touchdown this season, but his role as a pass catcher is way better, averaging 5 targets a game. So he's probably more of like a mid to back end RB3. But I think at this point, you have to favor Jaylen Warren over Najee Harris. Now, this could be the game where Najee goes out, is efficient, and gets into the end zone, but it's just not something I want to bank on here with Najee. On the other side with the Rams here, tough break to their running back room as a whole. You had Kyren Williams, who had just taken over as this huge workhorse. He was someone I was kind of looking to sell high on just because he hadn't actually been that great with his opportunities. Like fantasy-wise, he was great, but in terms of his efficiency on the ground, through the air, he hadn't been that amazing. But then actually this game in week 6, I think it was his best game in terms of rushing yards over expected. So he put together a great performance. Unfortunately, he suffers an ankle injury, and it seems like he's going to miss at least some time here. Seems like he is probably not going to be playing here in week 7. And then the guy Ronnie Rivers that I was kind of throwing out there as a potential handcuff, he's now expected to miss, I think it was like 4+ weeks. So not a great situation here with this backfield. Zach Evans was the only other running back to take a snap out of that backfield in week 6. We have seen Sean McVay be comfortable just unloading a massive workload onto Kyren Williams, who was not some sort of like proven running back. He's just kind of like a young depth option they had the previous season. So it's possible he just does that same thing with Zach Evans. But I also think this could turn into some sort of like rough committee, kind of like a situation we saw with the Cardinals where you just have like 3 guys splitting the work, and it's not a great spot. So I have Zach Evans as a fringe option, but just a lot of uncertainty there at that running back position. Now shifting over to the Cardinals Seahawks matchup. For the Cardinals, I think a lot of people were very high on Amari DiMercado heading into week 6. It didn't really pan out. He led the backfield in snaps and routes run, but he only saw 3 opportunities, which is really rough. Ingram led the team, or at least led the running backs, with 12 opportunities, and then Damian Williams saw 9. For me, this backfield is going to be a clear fade at this point until someone truly stands out. Like if Ingram takes a step forward, improves on his role, maybe he's playable heading into week 8. But at this point, like I don't really want to mess around with this running back room. Just going to be a fade. For the Seahawks, you continue to fire up Kenneth Walker as a very, very strong running back 1. That's going to lead us into the Packers taking on the Broncos. Packers coming off the bye. I'd assume Aaron Jones is going to suit up in this game. He made his return and then missed another game. If Aaron Jones is healthy, you got to fire him up. Plus a great matchup here against the Broncos. If Aaron Jones does play, going to be sitting A.J. Dillon. Then for the Broncos, this running back room is pretty gross. They kind of rolled out a 3-man committee on Thursday Night Football against the Chiefs. Javonte did lead this backfield in opportunities, and that was coming off a quad injury. He also took their only goal line snap. So I would play Javonte if I had to play one of these running backs. I also think he could improve on his role, now a week and a half removed from his first game back. This is also a pretty solid matchup here for the running back position. The Packers have allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs. If this wasn't like a smash matchup for these Broncos running backs, I would probably just fully fade this RB room. But I do have Javonte like slightly slid in here as a potential fringe option. We saw Jaleel McLaughlin kind of operate as the RB2, and then Samaje Perine was really only in there on the 2-minute drill snaps, so not a great look for Samaje moving forward. And then we're going to have a divisional game between the Chargers and the Chiefs, and pretty easy here. For the Chargers, Austin Eckler back against the Cowboys. You fire him up as a high-end RB1. And then for the Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco has really kind of separated himself in this backfield. You fire him up against the Chargers. And then I believe this is Sunday Night Football. Dolphins taking on the Eagles. Also, some pretty easy calls here. For the Dolphins, you fire up Raheem Mostert. We did see Salvon Ahmed be involved a little bit. Had a decent fantasy day because he had a late game touchdown when it was kind of garbage time. I do think we could see Jeff Wilson return here, which means Salvon Ahmed probably isn't super interesting. At this point, you just fire up Mostert as a running back one and then probably sit these other options. And then for the Eagles, you fire up DeAndre Swift as the Eagles RB1. And then the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, 49ers taking on the Vikings. 49ers running back room is up in the air at this point. When I'm recording this, we have not gotten news on the CMC MRI. If CMC is active, you're obviously playing him. If CMC is out, I talked about this in the waiver wire video where Jordan Mason kind of operated as the running back two behind him, even though Elijah Mitchell was active. So I was kind of saying, Jordan Mason may be the handcuff moving forward. But then we saw Kyle Shanahan come out and he basically said like he didn't want to rush Elijah Mitchell back because he had just gotten cleared from his injury and that he has earned like some sort of role based on how well he's played. So probably at this point, I would lean Elijah Mitchell as the better option if CMC was out, but I also think it could be some sort of committee here. So probably a situation we just want to wait on. Obviously, we have a lot of time, Monday Night Football. But if I had to choose like someone, if I was going to, pick one of these guys, if CMC was out, I probably would be leaning Elijah Mitchell at this point. And then the final team here, the Vikings. I have Alexander Mattison as a fringe option, Cam Akers as a sit. Pretty solid news for Mattison owners in terms of the usage in Week 6. He saw 45 snaps to only 9 for Cam Akers. He had 25 opportunities to only 3 opportunities for Akers. So Akers at this point is like a non-factor in this backfield. Also not a great sign long-term for Cam Akers if he's not able to even like break into a committee with Alexander Mattison, who has not been good. Madison had 25 opportunities. I believe he had 7 targets, and he only turned that into 11.2 PPR points. So still not great. He draws a really tough matchup here against the 49ers. The Vikings did not look good in a great matchup against the Bears, so I am a little bit concerned about this offense going up against this 49ers defense. Still think Madison's an RB3, but just because he had a great workload doesn't mean I'm ready to fire him up here as a confident RB2 against the 49ers. And that is going to wrap it up for all 13 Week 7 matchups. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. My wide receiver start sit will be out today also. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.